In this section, we'll explain why we need to think differently about the link between nature and development. This link has been at the heart of the development of humanity, ever since people started growing crops thousands of years ago, using the nature around them. At that time, people were mainly hunter-gatherers, and nature was, besides a few handy crops, a regular threat to human lives. But if we fast forward a few thousand years to 2021, unfortunately, we now see that we are the main threat. If we were to rewrite the story of a Little Red Riding Hood today, the victim would more likely be the wolf. Such is the impact we are having on nature. The wolf would perhaps be hunted by people in jeeps, shooting at it from far away. And the people would notice that once the wolf disappeared, the ecosystem around it started to disappear too. And hunting is only one of many threats our world's wildlife face. But the many threats do have one thing in common. They're all caused by us, humans. So why are we the threat? Because we have developed our economies while taking nature for granted. And this problem is clear when we look at finance. Around the world, most financial decisions are still taken without taking nature into account. We need to develop our economies without any further deforestation, without degrading our soils, and without adding more carbon into the atmosphere, and without reducing the numbers of endangered wildlife. How do we do this? How can we make our public financial system nature positive? And how, in particular, can we have our COVID-19 recovery measures impact nature positively? These are the questions we'll be answering in the coming sessions. Welcome, everyone, to this session on transforming public sector finance to become nature positive. The last 10 years, the public sector spent around $121 billion per year to protect biodiversity. And that sounds like a very big amount. But actually, it's not, because it only represents a tiny fraction of the world's GDP, around 0.25%. That is a tiny investment considering our lives literally depend on nature. If you consider how many jobs and how much economic growth is created by our national parks and other natural areas, how much carbon they are holding, and the role they play to clean our air and water, it becomes clear we are underinvesting. The private sector has an important role to play to invest more and better, and we will talk about it in another session. But the public sector is very far from realizing its true potential. The good news is there are a lot of tools available to help. UNEP's Biodiversity Finance Initiative, BIFIN, found there are 150 mechanisms to finance nature and developed a methodology helping countries to decide the best ones for their context. Let's see how that works.
Biodiversity is in severe decline, and it isn't getting the support it deserves. While an estimated $824 billion is needed to protect and restore nature, so far only around $143 billion is being pledged to protect our planet. BioFin is working to close this finance gap, to show how nature-positive economies can work for people and planet. BioFin was initiated 10 years ago in response to the urgent global need to finance biodiversity. BioFin is now working in over 40 countries, working alongside governments, civil society, vulnerable communities, and the private sector to catalyze investments in nature. Investments that create jobs and opportunities for communities. Investments that secure a sustainable future for all. BioFin's team of experts are on the ground, developing biodiversity finance plans, roadmaps towards a more sustainable future. These tailored plans draw on the BioFin Finance Solutions Catalog, 140 innovative biodiversity finance solutions, 140 opportunities to invest in nature and people. Results from BioFin's finance solutions include $1 million carbon sequestration in Kazakhstan, $2.8 million for bird conservation in Indonesia, $40 million for protected areas in the Philippines, 140 opportunities to finance nature and life in your country. What are we waiting for? Biofin. Finance for nature.
As the video says, what are we waiting for? The first step in developing a biodiversity finance plan is to review the existing institutional framework and financing mechanisms. This will generate recommendations for a strong institutional framework. Let's see what the Deputy Chairman of the Environmental Regulation and Control Committee of Kazakhstan has to say about some of their recent work on their institutional framework.
Здравствуйте, я, Умаров Ермек Касымгалиевич, являюсь заместителем председателя Комитета экологического регулирования и контроля Министерства экологии, геологии, природных ресурсов Республики Казахстан. Казахстан – богата биоразнообразием страна, в которой представлен удивительный животный и растительный мир. Вместе с тем, развитие аграрно-индустриального сектора оказывает прямое влияние на состояние природной среды. Деградация земельных и дефицит водных ресурсов, загрязнение окружающей среды и повышение нагрузки на растительный и животный мир ведут к сокращению биоразнообразия, ухудшению здоровья и уменьшению благосостояния населения. Поэтому на протяжении многих лет в стране обсуждался вопрос реформирования экологического законодательства в целях учета баланса между экологическими, экономическими и социальными интересами. 2 января 2021 года президент Республики Казахстан Касым-Жомарт Кемелевич Токаев подписал новый экологический кодекс, который отвечает всем современным экологическим вызовам и содержит важные правовые нормы для сохранения природы нашей страны. Вклад в разработку нового экологического кодекса внесла инициатива финансирования биоразнообразия «Биофин», приложив такие правовые нормы, как компенсации за потери биоразнообразия, добровольные платежи за экосистемные услуги, принципы развития экологического туризма на территории национальных парков, углеродные офсеты и зеленые инвестиции. Данные механизмы предложены в результате анализа финансирования биоразнообразия, ранее проведенного проектом «Биофин». Чем примечательны данные изменения в экологическом кодексе? Механизм компенсации за потери биоразнообразия призван повышать экологическую ответственность компаний, которые реализуют инфраструктурные проекты. Механизм позволяет выявить негативные воздействия проектов на биоразнообразие, предусмотреть мероприятия по предотвращению, минимизации, смягчению негативных воздействий на биоразнообразие, провести оценку риска потери биоразнообразия и предусмотреть мероприятия по их компенсации. Платежи за экосистемные услуги в новом экокодексе закреплены как добровольный механизм, который позволит строить партнерство не только между государством и частным сектором, но и между компаниями частного сектора. Принципы экотуризма основаны на экологических требованиях при использовании земель особо охраняемых природных территорий. Они включают в себя планирование количества туристов, недопущение причинения вреда окружающей среде, выбор транспорта, оказывающих наименьшее негативное воздействие на окружающую среду, вовлечение местных сообществ в организацию туров, минимизация образования твердо-бытовых отходов и информирование туристов. И, наконец, для усиления защиты лесов и сохранения лесного биоразнообразия в экологический кодекс включены нормы по углеродным офсетам и зеленым инвестициям. Эти нормы гармонизируют с глобальными обязательствами страны по достижению климатической нейтральности. Стремление к совершенствованию законодательства, а также своевременное реагирование на глобальные вызовы позиционирует Казахстан как страну, поддерживающую принципы устойчивого зеленого развития. Поэтому усиление ответственности за охрану природы – это большое достижение и подтверждение четкого понимания бережного отношения к использованию природных богатств.
When we are dealing with biodiversity finance, we should not treat this as just a conservation issue for environmental ministries to deal with. On the contrary, financial institutes need to take a lead role and become our new biodiversity champions. In Sri Lanka, the central bank is leading a coalition of financial institutes to green the finance sector. Let us hear their story next.
Hello, I'm Awani Koirawata from UNDP Sri Lanka. Thank you for joining our discussion today on sustainable financing in transition to a more resilient world. Here with us today is Dr. Anil Pereira. He is the Director, Domestic Operations Department, and he's also the Secretary of the Steering Committee to Sustainable Financing. And also here with us is Mr. Adesha Pereira. He's the Senior Manager to Sustainable Banking to STB Bank. Thank you so much for taking your time A sustainable mobilization of public as well as private funding is required in the transition to a more resilient world. How has the banking sector taken proactive steps to implement sustainable financing roadmap?
Sri Lanka is a country that is heavily reliant on our nature, right? We are tourism revenue, agriculture and plantation sector. All of them rely on the well-being of nature to sustain. And so how the sustainable finance roadmap comes in is that Sri Lanka has set a sustainable vision 2030. How as a country we would try to progress on different sectors, looking at aspects like climate change and biodiversity. So the roadmap has set timelines for action for 2025, 2028, 2030, and so on, where all the actors in the financial sector would need to take action. Biofin played a key role in understanding what the investment gaps are when it comes to certain key initiatives that we had to undertake to build, to restore our ecosystems and building that natural resilience. So we now, as a result of Biofin, we understand what the investment gap is, and through the central bank's roadmap, we have identified how we could kind of go into come up with new financial instruments like green loans, green bonds, and sustainable linked loans.
So this roadmap, the roadmap you mentioned, how does this roadmap will impact the financing sector and the general public of a developing country like Sri Lanka?
Now, this roadmap proposes a series of strategic activities in relation to implementing sustainable finance in Sri Lanka. Now, we categorize these activities into 6 focus areas. The first and foremost, and obviously, the financing is the most important aspect. And also integration of these environmental, social governance aspects to financial markets. It's also one of the key areas. Financial inclusion, that is also a key area, and also capacity building, cooperation internationally, locally, as well as measurement and reporting. Now, what we think, realization of these actions under the roadmap will benefit the financial sector as well as public at large. Now, if you look at the financial sector in Sri Lanka, it is mainly led by banks. Now, banks or other financial institutions or the markets in any country, I think they are basically supporting the activities of economic agents, where their activities will have impact on the environment. So in that sense, enhancing the resilience of the financial sector and enabling the financial sector to adhere to some effective environmental, social, and governance risk management will ensure that the financial institution or the market itself creates some long-term benefits for the sector.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pereira. Thank you both of you for taking time to be with us here today.
While the government has multiple opportunities to finance nature on its own, at the local level, we need to closely engage with civil society and indigenous communities. Costa Rica launched a crowdfunding campaign called Huella del Futuro, Footprints for Our Future. Let's see how it works.
The planet has sent us a loud and clear message. Nature and people's prosperity are connected. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Costa Rica, as well as the rest of the world, is facing social and economic challenges and requires solidary action to recover from them. Which is why the Costa Rican government, MINAI, FONAFIFO, FUNBAM, with support from Biofin, UNDP, created Huella del Futuro, a crowdfunding campaign that seeks to improve the living conditions from people in the North Zone, specifically women. An initiative that all people and companies might join. We need your help to restore Costa Rican landscapes and ecosystems with native, forest, ornamental, and fruit trees in order to support a sustainable, fair, and inclusive economy reactivation. On the first phase, we want to plant 200,000 trees in the northern region and ensure their maintenance for 5 years, while generating new jobs and green wages that will be possible with your help. We would like to contribute with the Costa Rican goal of reaching 60% of forest coverage by 2030, as well as enhancing communities' resilience amidst the climate emergency and to protect the country's biodiversity. With Huella del Futuro, Footprints for Our Future, and the commitment of local governments, we'll support initiatives that contribute to the planting of trees on public areas and wildlife corridors, agroforestry systems, nurseries, secondary forests, harvest zones and riparian forests, maintenance teams, combat brigades against forest fires. Through the fund collection platform, you can adopt from 1 to 1,000 trees, and the corporate footprints that exceed the adoption of 1,000 trees will be acknowledged sponsors of live sculptures made by Costa Rican artists. Together, we can help Costa Rica become greener while supporting recovery for their people and the planet. Leave your footprint today and assure a better future for those you care. Go to www.huelladelfuturo.cr and become part of this initiative.
That's a very inspirational example from Costa Rica, showing how we can support local communities, grow our forest, and save biodiversity all in one. Anyone can contribute to this campaign. Just find Huella del Futuro online and make a donation. This is your chance to make a real contribution today. Next, we will look at financing that has a negative impact on nature. The OECD estimates governments spend around $500 billion every year on things that harm nature. That's about 4 times as much as our biodiversity positive investments that are about $121 billion per year. This includes a lot of things like subsidies for fertilizers and fossil fuels. But let us now hear from none other than Sir David Attenborough, who will explain why we especially need to look into subsidies that harm our oceans.
Imagine a healthy ocean, its abundance and vitality restored. And not just any ocean, your ocean. Every corner of every ocean around the world, vibrant, abundant, and productive. Healthy seabeds, fish stocks recovered, monitored wisely, fished sustainably, and feeding many more people than they do now. The good news is that it is possible. But we are standing in our own way. We are paying huge sums of money, public money, to keep damaging and destructive fishing activities afloat. Government subsidies are keeping fishing boats fishing, even when there are too few fish left for fishing to be profitable. These subsidies create tensions between competing fishermen and nations. And they also fund the ongoing destruction of the natural world on which we all depend. But all is not lost. We can turn this around right now. Your governments have been tasked with negotiating new global rules on fisheries subsidies by the end of this year to set us all on a more sustainable course. The World Trade Organization has previously negotiated global rules for government subsidies to industry and farming. Now it's time to put an end to subsidies that harm our oceans too. Around the globe, small-scale projects are already paving a way forward, showing how investment in local coastal communities can lead to remarkable recoveries under the waves. A global deal to end harmful fishery subsidies is the next vital step in the restoration of our oceans to their former abundance and diversity. Reaching the right deal might not be easy, but a sustainable future for the oceans and ourselves is within reach. We must seize this opportunity and act now to ensure a healthier future for each and every one of us forever.
Thanks a lot to the WWF for that contribution. The world's global agreement on nature, the Convention on Biological Diversity, has a target to reduce these harmful subsidies. But what can countries do about it? Recently, the FAO, UNEP, and UNEP launched a report called A Multi-Billion-Dollar Opportunity, Repurposing Agricultural Support to Transform Food Systems. Let us now hear about some of the main recommendations from that report to explain what actions governments can take.
In the past 50 years, modern agriculture has improved the lives of hundreds of millions of people, and the number of people dying from famine has decreased hundredfold. But our current food system is not sustainable. It is driving biodiversity loss and accelerating climate breakdown. Moreover, it is failing to provide affordable, nutritious food to tens of millions of people around the world. Now, a large part of our food system is the financial support provided to producers through agriculture subsidies, incentives, amounting to nearly $540 billion a year. However, a recent report by FAO and UNDP and UNEP found that 87% of these subsidies and incentives, $470 billion, include measures that not only distort prices, but they actually harm biodiversity and human health. This is a lost opportunity to tackle our triple planetary crisis of biodiversity loss, climate change, and inequality. More than 720 million people face hunger, and nearly 1 in 3 people do not have access to adequate food. Meanwhile, our food systems and biodiversity crisis are code red for humanity. It doesn't have to be this way. By repurposing these subsidies, we can achieve triple wins for people, prosperity, and planet. We can promote nature-positive, climate-resilient food systems. We can promote regenerative agriculture and agroforestry. We can put communities at the heart of sustainable food production. We can spur achievements of the Sustainable Development Goals, and we can advance an inclusive green recovery. Now, there's no one-size-fits-all for everyone. While each country will need to determine its own best approach to repurposing subsidies, there are some common steps that every country can take right now. For example, they can take stock of the amount of existing subsidies and incentives that are provided each year and look at the positive and negative impacts of that finance. They can identify opportunities to repurpose that finance and focus potential impacts through a just transition. And they can implement changes to monitor the impacts of repurposing these funds on women and men in both the formal and informal sector. So as we look into a post-COVID era, agriculture subsidies and incentives can take center stage in recovery packages and help kickstart economic recovery around the world. So now is the time to radically rethink agriculture support. We can work with, not against, the 500 million smallholder farms worldwide, and we can work with, not against, nature. So now is the time to decide on our future. Repurposing agriculture subsidies and incentives can help steer and catalyze a greener, fairer, and more inclusive food system the world over, something that we all can agree on. So I hope you will join us on this journey. Thank you.
Reducing subsidies harmful to biodiversity remains a crucial step to reach our biodiversity finance goals. But now, let's look again at expenditures that have a positive impact on nature. BioFin has carried out biodiversity expenditure reviews in 35 countries. And let us now hear from India about their experience.
Dr. Rita, India has been amongst the first few countries to have introduced BioFin and you have been involved with this process right from the beginning in 2015. What would you say are some of the key takeaways from India's expenditure review?
Thank you, Dr. Ruchi. Let me start by saying that this was a very interesting exercise, first of its kind in India, so we really enjoyed doing it. In terms of key takeaways, well, several interesting results have emerged, but if I were to pick three, let me pick the following. The first being that government budgets are the principal source of biodiversity funding in India, and this is being done through schemes and programs of as many as 18 different ministries. Ministry of Environment is the key ministry, but other important ministries are Ministries of Agriculture, Water, and Rural Development. The second point, which is also very interesting, is that in India, states on an average during the study period of 7-8 years that we have used are spending 0.2% to 0.39% of their state domestic product. Which looks good, especially when compared with the recent estimate of OECD, which puts global biodiversity funding at 0.1% of the global GDP. The third point is regarding what do we do going forward. We have found that if coordination between different ministries and departments can be increased, then there is a good scope for improving the focus of biodiversity finance. And fortunately, this is being tried in the context of SDGs in India, and which is working well. So our recommendation would be that this model be emulated for biodiversity finance.
You said that this was the first of its kind study, and usually when you start something new, there are always challenges. So what kind of challenges did you face in conducting this expenditure review?
Oh, many. The key challenges I would like to outline. The first was that, as I said earlier, that multiple institutions and ministries are involved in supplying biodiversity finance in India. So the first challenge was to identify these actors and put them in a framework that would ensure that we do not double count, and also that our estimates are comprehensive. So that means we don't leave out any institution. The second challenge was mainly related to methodology. For example, it was a challenge defining what constitutes biodiversity finance. The second challenge was attribution methodology. Different countries have used different methodology, and in literature there's no single methodology available. The third challenge was classification of various activities of biodiversity conservation into something which would also correlate with the NBTs that we follow in India. And lastly, tagging biodiversity finance related activities to NBAP was another challenge.
The National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan.
Strategy and Action, that's right.
Okay. Given that there are limited sources of funding for conservation globally and even at the country level, how do you think can expenditure review aid in enhancing the budget allocation?
Expenditure review by its nature can answer questions like how much money is being spent on biodiversity conservation. It can also answer questions like whether this is enough or not. So once we have these results, then these can potentially inform the strategies that can be employed in scaling up, whether it is budgetary funding or through other sources.
Thank you so much for joining us today here, and we welcome your comments and views.
When we look at biodiversity financing, we should not forget to look at the subnational level, provinces, municipalities, and districts, because they are holding an increasing amount of public funds due to fiscal decentralization. We're now going to listen to some examples from the work in Mexico City and coastal municipalities in Guatemala.
Soy Marina Robles, secretaria del Medio Ambiente de la Ciudad de México. Y me interesa comentar con ustedes que la Ciudad de México, que representa menos del 1% de la superficie de nuestro país, reúne casi la sexta parte de la población de este país. Y a pesar de la larga historia en términos de uso, la ciudad sigue teniendo una enorme riqueza biológica que además está representada en una parte muy importante de su territorio, que son aproximadamente el 60% de un suelo de conservación, que significa que en este suelo está representada una muy buena parte de las distintas formas de las comunidades vegetales que existen en México. La biodiversidad, desde nuestro punto de vista y desde el punto de vista de todos los especialistas, un elemento esencial para nuestro bienestar, para poder mantener este vínculo que tenemos en general con la vida. La agenda ambiental que tiene la Ciudad de México es una agenda que busca recuperar las condiciones de la naturaleza y también los derechos humanos de las personas. En esta nueva idea que existe de planeación desde la rosquilla, donde necesitamos tener siempre un equilibrio entre lo que ofrecemos como sociedad, lo que necesitamos como sociedad y también el respeto que necesitamos hacia la naturaleza. Para eso la Ciudad de México ha hecho una inversión muy importante en materia ambiental, no solamente en la Secretaría que yo encabezo, sino en los otros sectores del gobierno de la ciudad, sabiendo que las condiciones ambientales dependen de los distintos sectores, de las distintas actividades que se realizan en un sitio. Una de las cosas que estamos haciendo es avanzando en la conservación, en la recuperación de este suelo de conservación, en un proceso de revegetación de la ciudad donde tenemos 2 años de trabajo, sembrados alrededor de 20 millones de plantas en distintas partes de la ciudad, intentando reequilibrar un desequilibrio histórico de las áreas verdes con las que goza la Ciudad de México. En un trabajo de rescate de los cuerpos de agua, porque tenemos claro que la ciudad tiene que recuperar estas venas verdes, estas venas azules que le regresen al interior de la ciudad a su naturaleza. Sabemos que trabajos de este estilo solo pueden ser hechos en conjunto con los distintos actores, con los distintos sectores. En este esfuerzo por reconectar a la ciudad con la naturaleza, una de las alianzas importantes es la que hemos establecido con Biofin. Es una iniciativa para mejorar las condiciones del manejo de las finanzas. Nos está permitiendo diseñar y encontrar soluciones de financiamiento que hagan más eficiente el gasto público, que maximice los resultados positivos y que nos permitan atraer mayor inversión internacional e inversión de los distintos sectores. Esto nos ha permitido mejoras en un fondo ambiental público con el que cuenta la ciudad, que nos ha permitido un manejo más eficiente del presupuesto y que por supuesto nos aporta mayores ganancias y también generar estas condiciones de atracción de recursos internacionales. El acompañamiento que Biofin nos ha hecho junto con el Instituto Nacional de Estadística y Geografía, el INEGI, realizamos el análisis del gasto de biodiversidad que realiza el Gobierno de México para estimar cuánto estamos invirtiendo y qué significa esta inversión, cuáles son los impactos positivos de estas inversiones, de manera que podamos reconocer cuáles son los beneficios ambientales y también sociales que eso nos provoca. Creemos que esto es una gran oportunidad de replicar, de escalar, y por eso la ciudad se enorgullece de esta alianza, de este trabajo, al ser la primera entidad subnacional en el mundo en usar esta metodología y convertirse, por lo tanto, en un referente. Estamos convencidas que las ciudades son claves en el desarrollo de acciones para mejorar las condiciones ambientales y las condiciones de bienestar de las personas. Estamos convencidas de que las ciudades tenemos que cambiar la lógica bajo la cual nos relacionamos con la naturaleza. Desde hace muchísimos años, las ciudades establecieron a la naturaleza solamente como una escenografía, a sus alrededores, afuera. En la Ciudad de México creemos que la naturaleza tiene que entrar a las zonas urbanas. Tenemos que abrir la puerta a la biodiversidad, a que se reconecten los procesos de la naturaleza y que permitan verdaderamente construir un futuro para todas las personas y para toda la vida del planeta.
Guatemala ha sido catalogado a nivel mundial como un país megadiverso, derivado de los elevados índices de diversidad de genes, especies y ecosistemas que este país contempla, así como la amplia diversidad cultural de Guatemala. También es de resaltar la importancia que tienen los recursos genéticos de esta región, ya que Guatemala forma parte de uno de los 8 centros de origen de diversificación de plantas cultivadas en el planeta. La inversión pública que el país realiza en temas de diversidad biológica se estima que oscila alrededor del 0.6% del Producto Interno Bruto. Esto es un aproximado de $180 millones, de los cuales el 64% de esa inversión la realizan los gobiernos locales a través de las municipalidades. En Guatemala, desde el año 2014, se viene implementando la iniciativa Finanzas para la Biodiversidad, la cual es una iniciativa promovida por el Programa de Naciones Unidas para el Desarrollo e implementada por una serie de instituciones a nivel nacional. Entre esta iniciativa se han impulsado 4 soluciones financieras que tienen por objetivo aumentar la inversión pública que Guatemala realiza en biodiversidad. Una de esas soluciones financieras es por medio de acciones que se están implementando con gobiernos locales a través de las municipalidades en 5 municipalidades de la costa sur del Pacífico guatemalteco, la cual es una región altamente diversa y constituye una de las regiones que ha sido identificada como uno de los vacíos en conservación dentro del sistema guatemalteco de áreas protegidas. Por medio de estas 5 municipalidades se ha logrado movilizar cerca de $700,000 que son invertidos en acciones de conservación, uso sostenible y protección de la diversidad biológica de esta región marino-costera del Pacífico de Guatemala. Se espera que en el año 2021 este número de 5 municipalidades se aumente a 10. En el año 2020, la iniciativa Finanzas para la Biodiversidad, con el liderazgo del Ministerio de Finanzas de Guatemala, desarrolló una guía de clasificación del gasto público ambiental municipal, la cual ayudará a las autoridades ediles a identificar y clasificar de una manera precisa las actividades de protección de medio ambiente, especialmente las relacionadas con la protección y conservación de la biodiversidad. Otro de los objetivos de esta guía es promover la transparencia del gasto público municipal en materia de medio ambiente. Este producto será complementado con una guía para dar mayor relevancia a las inversiones en biodiversidad al momento de formular los presupuestos municipales, así como con la elaboración de propuestas de financiamiento para los consejos departamentales de desarrollo que se enfocarán en desarrollo rural basado en la gestión sostenible de la diversidad biológica. Además, se promoverá la actualización de las tarifas de los servicios municipales para apoyar esquemas de pagos por servicios ambientales. Todas estas acciones permitirán que las municipalidades gestionen mayores presupuestos para actividades de manejo sostenible de biodiversidad y que promuevan el desarrollo de sus comunidades para avanzar en la agenda de desarrollo al 2030 sin dejar a nadie atrás.
Great to see local governments taking the lead in conservation. Now, let us zoom in on a specific financial instrument that has become very popular in recent years: green bonds. How can you launch them as a country? And what can they do for nature? Let's hear how Zambia is developing their green bond market.
So as Biofin Zambia, the idea of us developing Zambia's green bond market actually emerged as part of the prioritization process when we were developing the Biodiversity Finance Plan for Zambia. And that was meant to actually bridge, the finance gap that we saw in terms of environmental protection, obviously vis-a-vis, climate change and biodiversity conservation. And so when we actually did take stock of some of the things that were actually missing for us, to fully develop Zambia's green bond market. One of the missing links was actually a legal framework. And so we had to reach out to the Securities and Exchange Commission, being the regulator of the capital markets, to try and see how we could actually partner to move this agenda forward.
When Biofin Zambia approached this with the proposition of developing a framework that would enable businesses to raise finance, green finance, through the issuance of green bonds, we were more than excited, because that firstly sat very well in terms of our deeper conviction that climate change, issues to do with biodiversity, and basically issues to do with saving humanity. So we have had a very interesting relationship with Biofin. We went on to develop this framework within a year, and we are currently still working together in terms of raising awareness, basically targeting would-be issuers of the green bond instrument.
We've actually, reached out quite a number of entities doing awareness about, just green bonds and the benefits that actually accrue to a country if you actually go the green bond, issuance route. And one of the missing links also is, the issue of, fiscal incentives. We have two that we've since, sent to the Ministry of Finance to try and seek, promulgation. That is one on zero rating the withholding tax, and also the, making the issuance costs of green bonds become tax deductible. So basically, we're actually trying to incentivize both, issuers and also the investors in green bonds.
So the steps that we've done so far is to see that regulations and rules are in place to avoid greenwashing and ensure that funding goes to the intended purpose. The way forward is to see that incentives are obtained and the first issuer goes onto the market.
Yesterday, the government of Zambia did come up with a new ministry, called the Ministry of the Green Economy and Environment, and then that looks like a very good, avenue for championing some of these instruments that we've actually been working on.
A mechanism that is similar to a green bond is the green Sukuk, implemented under the regulations of Islamic finance. Let us now hear from Indonesia what it is and how they have used it to finance their nature.
The government of Indonesia has implemented the concept of green Sukuk to finance the eligible green project which align to the existing green Sukuk framework. In principle, besides climate change adaptation and mitigation projects, Indonesia's green Sukuk framework also includes biodiversity projects as one of the eligible sectors to be financed or refinanced by green Sukuk issuance. It will surely be a great opportunity to have biodiversity-related projects to be financed by the sovereign green Sukuk issuance.
In 2018, the government of Indonesia successfully issued the world's first sovereign global green Sukuk, a Sharia-compliant bond which proceeds exclusively used to finance and refinance government's green projects. This $1.25 billion issuance reached a broad range of investors, including conventional, Islamic, and green investors, and was oversubscribed by 2.5 times, signaling the growing market demand for sustainable and responsible investment. Following this success, the government of Indonesia issued its second global green Sukuk in 2019, its third in 2020, and its fourth in 2021. The four global issuances raised a total of $3.5 billion and received multiple international recognitions. To further expand the domestic investor base and strengthen Indonesia's Sharia financial market, in November 2019, the government issued the world's first retail green Sukuk. Being offered online, the issuance attracted over 7,500 Indonesian investors, of which the majority are millennials. This success is continued with the second retail green Sukuk issuance in 2020, further advancing financial inclusion and awareness on green and sustainable investing in the country. Indonesia's Green Sukuk refers to the Republic of Indonesia Green Bond and Green Sukuk Framework, which covers the 9 green sectors that are eligible to be financed and/or refinanced by the instrument. The 2018, 2019, and 2020 Global Green Sukuk issuance, which finance and refinance projects under 5 eligible green sectors located in all provinces across Indonesia to accelerate progress towards green and sustainable development.
We hope you got a better idea about what's done around the world to finance our nature. And if you want to learn more, there's a lot of information available online. For example, you can check Global Canopy's little book on financing nature. Or you can have a look at the Biodiversity Finance e-learning course on the Learning for Nature platform. Or simply check biofin.org. The COVID pandemic forced all countries to spend a lot on response and recovery measures. But how can we make sure all these budget allocations don't have any negative impact on nature, but hopefully a positive one? That's the key question in our next session.
Hello, and a really warm welcome to this session of Nature for Life, focused on the opportunity of a green recovery from COVID-19. My name is Emily Benson, and I'm the Director of Engagement for the Green Economy Coalition. Proud to say that we are the world's largest civil society alliance on a mission to accelerate the transition to a fair green economic system. And can I say what a pleasure it is to be with you all today, wherever you are in the world. So nearly 2 years on from the outbreak of COVID, we're only just beginning to make sense of really the pain that's caused communities all over the world. It's left no corner of our economic systems untouched. 75 million people out of work, 120 million people into extreme poverty. And in addition, the COVID pandemic has added $24 trillion in global debt. So while there was a drop in carbon emissions during the pandemic due to lockdowns and restrictions on travel, this really has only been temporary. Carbon emissions are going right back up again. And at the same time, nature is facing a crisis on so many different fronts. Our biodiversity, our soils, our oceans, our forests, all are facing, in the words of the United Nations, Code Red. In short, we're running out of time. But through this crisis, something new has emerged. There's been a groundswell of citizens, communities, and quite diverse movements demanding to build back, or indeed build forward, from COVID in a very new way. So from the United Nations to Black Lives Matter, from the World Economic Forum to the International Trade Union Congress, we're hearing that people want change. And we're hearing the same from the streets. 80% of young people interviewed in 17 countries by the Pew Research Center earlier this year confirmed that they want to change how they live, they work, and they vote as a result of the pandemic. 1.2 million people signed a petition to the European Union demanding a just and green recovery. Citizen assemblies undertaken in country after country are saying the same thing. We want and we deserve a safe and stable future. We want change. As we know, governments are now spending trillions of dollars to stimulate their economies, far beyond what we spent in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. And there's a chance to use that spending power, ranging from stimulus packages to public investment programs and fiscal tools, to grow green economic sectors and industries, ones that provide new job opportunities, that drive innovation, that generate livelihoods for our poorest communities, and above all, invest back in nature. And we are reminded by the world's leading economists and development experts that investing in nature brings multiple societal and economic returns. For every dollar spent on nature restoration, at least $9 of economic benefits can be expected. Nature positive solutions can create 191 million jobs by 2030. So investing in nature now is a way out of the economic downturn, a way of reviving our economies along very different pathways. So in this segment, we're going to dig into the green recovery agenda. Firstly, we'll be looking at the opportunities of a nature-based green recovery, those that perhaps go beyond just low carbon and really invest in our ecosystems and our biodiversity. Secondly, we're going to be looking at what different countries are doing. And thirdly, we're going to explore where the gaps are and what needs to happen next. But before we dive into the details and practicalities of a nature-based green recovery, I want to pass to Kumi Naidu, former Executive Director of Amnesty International and Greenpeace International, to share his very personal reflections on really what we want to recover to. Over to you, Kumi.
Thanks so much, Emily, and I'm so delighted to join you all today as part of the session focused on the green recovery. Today, I wanted to share with you a poem I wrote during lockdown that essentially calls for a new social contract. We are all desperate to get back to normal, but should we? Normal. What an average word. So uninspired, it's actually absurd. In a time when we have been forced to change our ways, to pause and isolate and dream of better days, that we'd ever yearn for the world of yesteryear, a world so divided, so fragmented by fear, it's mind-boggling at best that we might just blow Mother Nature's test, longing for the same madness that put us in this global sadness. Of me first and screw you and buy four for the price of two. Surely, getting back to normal can't be our aim after all the sacrifices, death and pain. Yes, this pandemic has brought us to our knees, cutting jobs and highlighting inequality. Our leaders are exposed, and the broken systems they have imposed are now obviously not making any sense. So why do we obsess and resist what needs to be? The end to these failed economic schemes and political machines that weaken and divide, leaving only the elite satisfied. No, we have to be better than this. And if not for ourselves, we must for our kin, our children and their children and the ones after them. Thankfully, our youth has far more motivation to take action and end the years of frustration by breaking down the walls we've created and the inequality that is so outdated. So now, what are you going to do? Let's hope it's something substantially new to keep building post-corona a human existence that is far from over. Learning from our lessons, respecting all persons, especially our healthcare and essential workers, who were invisible to many of us before this pandemic. And never again, lest we forget what and who really matters, even when all hope scatters, because this tragedy surely must be our big opportunity to look beyond what has always been and build a world that we can all thrive in. Thank you so much for listening. And as I hand it back to Emily, I would like to note that nature does not negotiate. We cannot change the science. All we can do is change political will. And thankfully, political will is a renewable resource. Merci beaucoup. Muchas gracias. Shukran. Asante sana. Thank you very much.
Kumi, thank you so much. What a powerful plea. What a stark reminder of what this recovery moment offers. Really a chance to build back trust between citizens and the people in charge. And with that final vision of a vision to build a world that we can thrive in, still ringing in our ears, we're now going to focus on what a green recovery really means and where the opportunity lies. We're going to be joined by Angel Gurria, former Secretary General of the OECD, who will outline exactly what the opportunity is of a green recovery and some of the key steps for taking action.
COVID-19 crisis provides a stark reminder of the vulnerability of individual countries and the international community to what was a well-known pandemic risk. Scientists estimate that zoonotic diseases account for 3/4 of new or emerging diseases in humans. It is estimated that an investment between 22 and 31.2 billion per year could significantly reduce the risk of future pandemics, while delivering co-benefits for biodiversity and climate change. We're talking about 2 orders of magnitude less than the damages pandemics produce. Biodiversity and economic systems provide invaluable but often invisible benefits. Nutrient cycling, habitat provisioning, pollination, erosion control, carbon sequestration, climate regulation. Several institutions are tracking country responses to the pandemic and assessing their greenness. Less than 10% of the funding of green measures benefit biodiversity and nature, and less than 7% is dedicated to adaptation measures, despite the tragic extreme weather events that have been happening around the world. Furthermore, other analyses suggest that overall, more money is spent on activities that could be potentially harmful to the environment. For example, fossil fuel subsidies. So we cannot continue isolating ourselves from nature cycles to achieve the economic and social development of our nations. Not investing in a green recovery is a once-in-a-generation lost opportunity. Now is the time to reconstitute the cycles of water, of nutrients, of carbon, while creating circular economies in strategic sectors that allow us to adapt quickly to new planetary conditions and increase the so much needed economic, health, and environmental resilience of our cities and of our vulnerable communities. Effective management of health and environmental risks in the future requires a holistic, interdisciplinary approach that takes into account the interconnections between people. Investments in COVID-19 recovery should be guided by principles of well-being, justice, sufficiency, and efficiency, and to learn to live within planetary boundaries. We can use this opportunity to invest in public works involving reforestation and the restoration of ecosystems. Just restoring forests, peatlands, and mangroves has a potential to reduce global CO2 emissions by 10 billion tons annually. And every dollar spent on restoration yields at least $9 in economic benefits. A green COVID recovery is an opportunity for a just transition to the nature positive, zero carbon future that we need. And we need to put nature at the heart of sustainable development planning by developing national green economy plans. And we need to recognize and value the role of nature in building resilience to external shocks, and to invest in nature-based solutions for people and planet. Let me quote Ian McHarg, the Glasgow-born Scottish architect, who in his book Designed with Nature said, "Let us green the earth, restore the earth, heal the earth." Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gurria. A sharp reminder of the many invaluable but invisible benefits that nature provides us, and really reminding us of the imperative of this green recovery. Clearly, there are very practical steps that countries can now do to align their COVID recovery plans with a nature positive future. And it comes down to choices. The choices we make now will determine not only the next few years, but also decades to come. So we're going to turn now to some of the leading institutions who are really on the front line of working with governments all over the world at the moment in greening their COVID recovery plans and their investments. Firstly, we're going to hear from the Global Green Growth Institute and then from the UN Partnership Action for a Green Economy, UNPAGE, both of who are working directly with national decision makers and finance departments on their recovery efforts.
GGGI has been closely working with developing countries to provide technical, financial, and policy supports to tackle challenges raised by the COVID-19 pandemic. Building back a green and resilient recovery is a central piece of GGGI's roadmap for the implementation of our Strategy 2030, which started this year. With operations in more than 40 countries, GGGI has been playing a key role in supporting its members and partners identifying multiple structural changes to accelerate the implementation of post-COVID green and resilient recovery measures. GGGI has supported developing countries' effort to overcome financial barriers by drawing up plans for green recovery, accelerating access to climate finance, and identifying ways to increase resilience for the most vulnerable groups by creating green jobs. A significant, stable flow of financial resources for climate projects must be generated to developing countries to speed the green and resilient recovery. The key question is, what do we do next? First, learning from our experience of mobilizing over $2 billion between 2015 and 2020, we work with our members and partners to strengthen national mechanisms and build internal capacity to develop a pipeline of green bankable projects with both social and climate benefits. Second, a higher level of participation from the private sector is key to dealing with post-COVID green recovery. Governments not only prioritize green recovery measures, but also strengthen incentives for private sector investors. Finally, it is essential to ensure a strong alignment between long-term national planning, NDCs, SDGs, and the recovery measures. This requires our members and partners' government to put in place joint indicators that allow the establishment of evaluation and monitoring frameworks for evidence-based decision-making.
Ladies, gentlemen, colleagues, and friends, COVID has forced decision makers to choose between mitigating the long-term threats to human prosperity through their recovery planning or amplify them. And PAGE, which is a joint effort of 5 UN agencies, UNEP, ILO, UNDP, UNIDO, and UNITAR, through its Green Recovery Support Program, has observed unprecedented support, political commitment to greening of economic recovery. However, when we observe the spending trends, they are not matching with the political commitment, and we will call for nations to align their recovery planning and spending with the political commitments that they have made. From the PAGE lessons learned on supporting countries, we have 3 main messages. Number 1, without macroeconomic reforms which are aligned with global ambitions for green and sustainable economy, we can only create successful projects, but we cannot create a shift which reverse the trends of increasing inequality, a warming planet, and erosion of the ecological foundations of economy. Number 2, the economic reforms and macroeconomic transformation does not happen automatically. It requires long-term sustained efforts and engagement and navigating through very complex political economy challenges. And number 3, that we have to be together in this effort. Without cross-sectoral and wider partnerships, it will not be possible to achieve the pace and the scale of change which is needed. And PAGE is a very proud partners for inclusive green economy, and we are calling for new countries to join us. So we wish you all a very successful event.
Thank you so much to our partners, UNPAID and GGGI, for sharing their insights from working very directly with decision makers. There are 2 points that are coming out really loud and clear. Firstly, that despite all the stimulus spending, only a tiny fraction is going towards greening our economic systems. Current estimates put it somewhere between 2.5% and 2% of all spending. And of that green spending, only 10% is going towards biodiversity. The second point is that while green stimulus is absolutely essential, the recovery agenda doesn't stop there. Rather, the next step is also about more structural changes. So from embedding nature in macroeconomic and national planning, it's about fiscal reform, so taxing carbon or eliminating fossil fuel subsidies or putting conditionalities on lending. It's about ensuring that social and natural capital included in national metrics of success. It's about ensuring that workers are supported and protected and provided the capacity they need as part of a just transition. So I think we've heard some of the essential steps that governments can take to green their recovery plans, but now we want to find out what's really happening on the ground, what's happening in different countries. So we're going to hear from my colleague, Chris Hopkins at the Green Economy Coalition, who's been working with national networks to monitor how their green stimulus and recovery spending is rolling out in different countries. So firstly, we're going to hear from him, and then we're going to have a short video overview of the Green Economy Tracker, which is a tool that tracks this transition in real time. And today we're actually launching new data and new results. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you so much, Emily, and it's a pleasure to join you all today for this session. I want to introduce you to a tool called the Green Economy Tracker. And this is a tool that has evolved over a long period, working with networks, working with experts, civil society organizations all around the world to assess what are the key policy changes that are required to transform an economy, transform it away from a brown economy, one that's based on fossil fuels and then destroys nature, and towards a green economy, i.e. one that restores nature and distributes those assets fairly. And this tool that we've created, it's dynamic, it's changing, and it incorporates lots of sources and feedback from civil society groups and the users of the tool itself. Until now, we've tracked 20 countries on the Green Economy Tracker, and I'm really proud to say that today we're launching a further 12 countries, and we have 9 more in the pipeline as well. And what we do with the tool is we track progress across 5 themes and 20 specific policy areas that are nested under those themes. And the newest policy area of which is a 21st policy specifically focused on a green recovery from COVID-19 and to assess progress on that policy area. And this policy, it's a cross-cutting policy. We see it as a one-stop shop almost, where you can go and look at the green recovery measures that are around the world, drawing together all the best sources and tools. And so our assessment has a 5-point scoring framework. We reward support packages that have a high level of green investment, they have strong green conditionality, and also reward attention to climate, to nature, and to an inclusive just transition. Governments which are putting in place plans for a fully transformational and structural shift in their economies do absolutely best of all in our scoring framework on the Green Economy Tracker. So this, what I'm showing you now, is what the data looks like at the moment. And you can go to the Green Economy Tracker platform and explore that and drill down into the different country stories that are there. And I would really encourage you to do so because there's lots and lots of interesting data there. So to give a couple of examples of the green recovery in action, you can go and look at France, for instance, where we have over $500 billion in overall stimulus and embedding green conditionality into this program by making support, for instance, for airlines and for car manufacturers conditional on much stronger environmental targets. So green conditionality being put at the center of a stimulus package. If you go and look over in India, which is spending less, only about 10% of GDP on a less green package overall, but with substantial funds and substantial jobs being created through a rural job creation and biodiversity management program, which is a really, really interesting innovation. In Nigeria, Nigeria, you have an even further constrained package, only around $6 billion, but 10% of it is being focused around solar energy systems for households, and also using this window, to phase out fossil fuel subsidies around the economy, which is really important. So if we take a further step back and look at the overall green recovery picture that we see through our green recovery tracker tool, we're seeing quite a few interesting macro insights. Firstly, there are strong signs of a green recovery in places such as Sweden, France, Canada, Spain, Portugal, and the UK, but most of the stimulus and investment is going towards reducing carbon. By contrast, much less is going towards natural capital, thinking about biodiversity, or an inclusive and just transition. And we feel this is definitely a missed opportunity for integrating those different things together into one package. Secondly, green recovery packages are economically credible. They are working, but as the list of countries I just mentioned shows, they are still the domain of richer countries. Middle and especially lower income countries are missing out on the green recovery opportunity window, and it is an opportunity. Limited fiscal space means that these countries, middle and lower income, urgently need greater support from multilateral and international donors to prioritize a green recovery. And even those countries that are the exceptions to this rule, countries like Costa Rica and Pakistan who are doing well, they still need more support. Thirdly, even those countries where green recovery is being prioritized, there are still too few deeper structural measures being deployed to match the short-term cash stimulus that we're seeing. And by this, I mean policies like overhauling investment criteria to green standards, pricing carbon, and phasing out fossil fuel subsidies across the economy. And specifically on nature, taking the opportunities to embed the value of biodiversity and natural capital into national and local planning decisions. So overall, throughout this tool, the Green Economy Tracker, we're seeing glimmers of green and inclusive and a more nature-based recovery than in the past. And our data shows there are still too many governments missing that opportunity, though, and that chance to set a new direction. So what I would do is I'd encourage you to go and visit the greeneconomytracker.org website, explore the tool, see the latest data, and also it's an evolving, growing, dynamic tool, so you can be part of updating it with new sources, stories, and information, and drawing on all those different exciting data sets and tools that are out there on the internet and out there being developed by researchers around the world. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much to Chris and to all of the organizations around the world who are helping us track this transition from the ground up. So I think what we're hearing is, yes, there are some really compelling glimpses of a green recovery, but where there is green investment, it tends to go towards reducing carbon rather than investing in nature. And we're also learning that lower income countries do need additional support from multilateral donors to ensure that they're not further locked into those brown economic pathways. So far, we focused a lot on nature, but what does a green recovery offer people? What does it mean for our jobs, our livelihoods, our communities? We want to take a closer look now at how COVID-19 has impacted the micro, small and medium-sized enterprises, MSMEs, all over the world. And it's worth reminding ourselves that MSMEs make up 90% of all our economies. They're the beating heart of our economic systems. So how have they been affected, and how can a green recovery agenda enable them to drive a green transition? Firstly, we're going to hear from small enterprises themselves, and then we're going to hear from Linda Walters of the Seed Network on what the recovery agenda offers or where the gaps are.
In the wake of COVID, we further recognized that rural households needed access to regular essential services as well as financial security. In order to address this, Frontier Markets partnered with over 10 different companies to introduce hygiene solutions, local groceries, and fintech services at the doorstep of the rural household. What we see is a unique opportunity to take further partnerships to scale. Frontier Markets now more than ever recognizes the value of rural women entrepreneurs, equipping them with the power of technology and leveraging data to help other products and service companies leverage our platform and achieve the sheer impact that we need to drive our vulnerable communities out of poverty and create a positive impact.
The actual pandemic has blocked the reusable waste material demand in addition to an increase in waste production due to delivery services. We arrange non-contact services, sanitation schedules, and sensitization to reduce the contagion risk. People are now more aware of their own overall waste production, including organics, electronics, and clothing. So it's an opportunity for us to widen our range. Promote equality on recycling chain by encouraging responsible consumption and citizens' awareness of their impact on environment.
Guerrilla tourism has lifted people out of poverty. A donation from every bag sold goes to support community health, guerrilla health, and conservation education around the national park. The COVID-19 pandemic is really affecting our enterprise because most of our customers, our main customers, are gorilla trekking tourists, and when they're trekking the gorillas, they often cross coffee farms and want to support the local communities. I see a lot of opportunity for gorilla conservation coffee in a green post-pandemic recovery because we are creating a market outside Uganda to buy gorilla conservation coffee.
At Farmerline, we combine technology and a network of field agents to help smallholder farmers increase their profits. As an organization, when the first COVID-19 case was reported in Ghana, we translated WHO COVID awareness messages into 7 local languages and sent them as voice messages to over 18,000 farmers. We also use these channels to ensure that our inputs finance, farmer education, and market access services were still in full force. We are actively seeking to partner with the government to use digital platforms to offer training, farm input, and market access to more smallholder farmers across the country during and beyond COVID-19.
Hi, this is Floriza from Kibebe, Malawi. We make ethical gifts, accessories, and home decor at the refugee camp. COVID hit us hard and sales plummeted. We started making cloth masks, which helped somewhat. But in order to really make a difference, we see the green innovation being localizing our supply chain. That would mean adding value to the cotton that's grown here and making it into a textile that is good for the environment and can be made by people around us.
We recycle plastics to make plastic timbers and other building hardware. Due to COVID-19, we had to close down to respond to government regulations and the World Health Organization. However, we saw a need for personal protective equipment, especially for government frontline workers. And we retooled to manufacture reusable face masks and plastic face shields out of waste. Moving forward, circular businesses are going to be very critical in attaining the UN Agenda 2030 because they put people, profit and planet at the core of what they do. We all have a role to play in this.
Hi there, my name is Linda and I'm with SEED. We are a UN-founded partnership on sustainable development founded in 2002. And today we fund, support and build a conducive finance and policy ecosystem for SMEs or eco-inclusive SMEs. And these are businesses who offer green products and services. They do this in an environmentally and economically sustainable and socially responsible way. So we at SEED were really encouraged to see the push from, among other EU policymakers, who are keen to have COVID interventions have a green, inclusive and resilient angle, the concept of green recovery or build back better. The good news is that research, for example, by Oxford University, is bearing out that green recovery versus a non-green recovery indeed delivers more jobs, higher short-term returns, as well as long-run cost effectiveness. The less good news is that despite the rhetoric, the majority of the stimulus is not reaching a significant part of our economies, SMEs, not to mention those enterprises that operate in the informal sector. So SMEs are an engine for employment and development. 90% of all businesses worldwide are SMEs. They really represent the lifeblood of our economies. And we know that the eco-inclusive SMEs that we support offer on average 28.4 jobs per enterprise, of which 40% goes to the poorest of the poor, the bottom of the pyramid, and 42% goes to women. And they save over 7,000 tons of GHG emissions every year, the equivalent of over 1,500 passengers vehicles driven in a year. So during COVID, we saw that our enterprises played a really key role as green job creators, as basic service enablers, enabling access to waste services, to energy, to water, to produce within the framework of sustainable agriculture. They provided and kept developing green tech. They preserved nature, and they built in this way the resilience in their communities. So there is a huge opportunity to have SMEs contribute to the economic, social, and environmental progress that the green recovery community is looking for. But there are existing gaps stemming from an historic lack of support for these actors and the nascent recognition of green recovery. So what are those gaps? So SMEs overall are suffering from a lack of recognition and a lack of handle on their impact. And this has led to them being overlooked in green recovery programs and support. It's fair to say that in COVID, support has gone to keep the bigger actors, the bigger companies afloat. And there's been a lack of emergency funding tailored to SMEs. We've also seen limited ability with support providers to adapt their programs quickly to COVID-19 context and the needs of enterprises, for example, in cash flow planning or so, and capacity building. And then there's the limited digital literacy and infrastructure that is hampering SMEs and their supporters alike.
So what do we need? We need data as evidence on the impact potential of SMEs, and especially those with green and social aspects, to give those SMEs more recognition and opportunities in larger green recovery support programs. We need better definitions or taxonomy on green, social, eco-inclusive enterprises, and a definition that's shared. We need financial support for locally rooted programs that pioneer flexible, local, and tailored approaches to capacity building. We need target financial recovery for smaller actors that are hard hit. We need digital infrastructure building to make sure that support programs serve and reach enterprises and their beneficiaries. And we need to equip them with digital skills. And lastly, we need to make sure that recovery schemes leverage lessons from existing enterprise support programs. If not, we're not going to be seeing the uptake needed here. So in systemic crises, the poorest and the most vulnerable in our societies are the most at risk. And supporting enterprises with economic, social, and environmental value built into their models, policymakers and others can stimulate recovery across communities.
Thank you so much to the SEED network for showing us firstly what huge potential there is for unleashing a small green enterprise revolution post-COVID, but also a stark call out to all decision makers to ensure that investment and policy initiatives actually reach small green enterprises. And that will only happen when those MSMEs are consulted with and have a place at the policy table. So we're coming to the end of this session on the green recovery, and I wanted to thank you all for joining us. Let's just consider now what I think we've heard. I think number one, we are seeing unprecedented demand from citizens all over the world to build back better from COVID in a very different way. People want more than slogans, they want change. Prioritizing a green and just recovery is a way of building back trust between citizens and the people in charge. Secondly, I think we've heard that the principles of an inclusive green economy, so that of justice and well-being and good governance and sufficiency and efficiency and planetary boundaries, really need to sit at the heart of this recovery agenda. Thirdly, a nature-based green recovery does mean multiple returns, both for communities, for green jobs, for new sectors, for small enterprises. And it means returns both in the long term and the short term. So the green recovery offers solutions to the big choices and the big issues that governments are facing today as a result of the pandemic. Fourthly, some countries are already taking advantage of the opportunity of a green recovery. They're putting in place green conditionality. They're investing in nature-based solutions. They're starting to support small green enterprises. But at large, too many countries are missing this huge opportunity to rewire or redesign their economic systems so that they're safe and more resilient. Green stimulus and investment isn't reaching the small and green social enterprises. And where green stimulus is happening, it's not reaching nature. So really the opportunity to rewire our economies with deeper, more structural changes remains at large. So finally, how we choose to recover from this global crisis is the defining moment of our generation and every generation after us. From the ashes of the Second World War emerged some of the key institutions of today, including the United Nations, the European Union, and also visions of universal welfare and human rights. From this crisis of COVID, we have the chance to build new institutions or to rewire our existing ones. Ones that can be fit for the 21st century, that can protect our communities and our planet from the challenges of this coming century. In short, we have this chance right now to build a new eco-social contract that's fit for the 21st century. So let's not let this moment pass. Thank you so much for joining us today.
The COVID-19 pandemic has reminded us what happens if we don't take investing in nature seriously and forget about the link between nature, our economies, and societies. We have seen that a lot of solutions are already out there. Countries need to start by measuring how much they spend on things that have a positive and things that have a negative impact on nature. From Mexico to Sri Lanka, from Zambia to Costa Rica, organizations like the UN, national and regional governments, and the private sector are coming together to create financial solutions that benefit people and planets. Many of these countries are in fact leading the way with financial solutions that work. We have also seen that much work needs to be done on phasing out harmful subsidies. The work to save our nature cannot succeed if countries are at the same time supporting businesses that destroy the environment. But the good news is that businesses are more and more coming on board to support the green agenda. Recently, more than 700 companies are urging governments to adopt policies to reverse nature laws by 2030. But also, do try this at home. Please don't think investing in biodiversity is something happening in faraway places only. Every day you can invest in biodiversity by buying organic products, checking the biodiversity impact of your savings, pension, or investments, or simply supporting a crowdfunding campaign. Together, we can make 2021 a watershed moment for financing our nature. Let's start today.